Okay, so last system of AP2, the reproductive system. We're going to start by talking about the male reproductive system, and then we're going to move on to female reproductive system. And then most likely after that, I'm going to talk about spermatogenesis and oogenesis, although I'm not sure yet. If I do decide to talk about that, it might take me an extra day to get that put together. But you'll see it, and I'll post an announcement as well. So let's start with the male reproductive system. So the reproductive system, the whole point of its existence is to procreate the species. We're trying to make more babies of humans so that we don't basically poof out of existence. The male reproductive system's job is to produce sperm and to transfer it to the female. So the male reproductive system, mid-sagittally cut, you have the urinary bladder and the rectum, nothing sitting on top of it, okay? You have the testes, they are sitting inside of the scrotum, okay? Now, the scrotum actually keeps the testes away from the body when it's too hot and close to the body when it's too cold. It's very, very important that the testes stay at the right temperature, because when they're not at the right temperature, it can actually impede sperm formation. So inside of the testes is where we actually start making the sperm. This little drop, comma looking thing out here is the epididymis. This is where they finalize. So we're making them in the testes, but they have to go through the epididymis to mature and actually become swimmers that can fertilize an egg. From the epididymis, it turns into the ductus deferens. This is the tube that when ejaculation happens, it carries everything to the urethra. So it comes up and over the bladder. You can see the ureter here, okay? And eventually it is put into the urethra, this tube here that goes through the penis, okay? You have several glands here that actually contribute to the final product that is semen. You've got the seminal vesicles, which is that guy right there. You've got this guy here that is the prostate gland. And that right there is the ejaculatory duct. Don't forget that duct is just a fancy way of saying tube. So when it's basically getting to that point where it's going to be ejaculated, this is where it needs to go. Excuse me. Now, as we move through the prostatic urethra, there is a very small portion of the urethra here where you've got the bulbourethral gland, which is also called Cowper's gland. And this actually is responsible, the Cowper's gland or the bulbourethral gland is responsible for making pre-ejaculate. One of the things that you have to keep in mind with the sperm, so semen with the sperm inside of it, of course, is very pH sensitive. Urine tends to run very acidic. If you were to just put the semen through the urethra with any type of urine residue left in there, it could potentially kill the sperm and basically reduce the chances of reproduction. So the bulbourethral gland releases pre-ejaculate that basically helps to neutralize that tube so that the sperm has a better chance of actually fertilizing an egg. So that bulbourethral gland puts pre-ejaculate into the urethra. Now, prostatic urethra, the part that goes through the prostate, great, I just said it, now I can't remember. Oh yes, before I forget, see this muscle here? This is actually a sphincter muscle that is designed to prevent urine from getting into the urethra when ejaculation is happening. Again, it has to do with that whole pH and making sure that the semen stays fertile. Anyway, the last portion of the urethra is actually called the spongy urethra. And this is actually going to be the region in the urethra that accomplishes an erection. And it's called spongy because it fills with blood to actually make it become erect so that it can be used to transfer sperm to the female. So you have the urethra, the penis itself. The end of the penis is called the glans penis. It actually is the most sensitive portion of the penis because it does have the most sensory receptors. And the prepuce, which I'm sure you've heard of, you just don't realize it. It's the foreskin, it's the covering. Most of the time nowadays, and not just for religious purposes, but for kind of sanitary purposes, we get circumcised. And that takes that prepuce or the foreskin off to make it a little bit easier to keep the area clean. Okay, so this is the urogenital triangle, okay? And based on where muscles are attached, it actually does make this kind of diamond shape. In the back here is where the coccyx is. Here on the sides is where that bottom kind of part of the butterfly on your pelvis is. And in the front here is the pubic symphysis. So the urogenital triangle is where you're going to find the base of the penis. And then the anal triangle, which is in the back, is where you're going to find the anus. Okay, so you know the landmarks. Now, the testy itself, if you go into the actual testy, you have this covering for the testy, and this is called the tunica albuginea. Internally, we have these internal connective tissue septa that actually divide that testy into little lobules or regions, okay? And inside of that, you have this tubing called the seminiferous tubule. This seminiferous tubule is where we originate or we create sperm from. So if you slice it, it kind of looks like this, where you can actually see the tube, but then you see all of these cells around the edge of that tube. So you've got the septa internally, you've got the seminiferous tubule. As these exit, you get to this tube here called the the tubulus rectus. Remember, rectus means straight. So these are the straight tubes exiting from the seminiferous tubule. Then you get into this kind of web network here of tubes called the rete testi. So remember what I said, the seminiferous tubule is where they're made, but they're not ready to swim or do anything yet. They're not mature enough to do anything yet. So as they exit through these efferent ductules, remember I said efferent meant exit. As they exit through there, they enter the epididymis. Remember that comma-like thing that was on the side of the testy? The epididymis has the head, the body, and the tail, okay? And this tubing is the duct, the tube of the epididymis. As these sperm work their way through this tubing, they get more and more mature until eventually, by the time that they reach the tail, they're actually motile. They are actually swimming. And the exit for them, like I said before, is the ductus deferens. You may have learned it, if you learned it in the past, as the vas deferens, but it's the ductus deferens now. Okay, so again, I'm going to go back a second. That little slice right there, okay? If we're looking at that, you can see the outside of the tube, okay? You can see these kind of pink bubblegum looking cells. You can see these other cells here inside that you can see obviously become sperm. And you can see that outside of that tubing are some other cells called interstitial cells or Leydig cells, in between stitial tissue. So the sustentacular cells, these kind of pink bubblegum looking cells, their job is to take care of the cells that are eventually going to become the sperm. So the spermatogonia cells are the cells that are basically creating the cells that will become sperm. As they divide, one cell will stay behind and another eventually becomes the primary spermatocyte, which divides again to eventually become the secondary spermatocyte. And then the spermatids. The spermatids basically have to undergo a morphogenesis, a change in shape, so that they don't look at like your classic spherical cell. They need to take on the appearance of the sperm with the head, the tail, all of that. So they actually have to undergo some changes in shape for that to happen. Now, by the time that you have the head with the little tail on it that you can see over here, okay, those are going to be what we call the sperm cells. The membrane that you see around that tube is going to be the basement membrane. But this is a slice out of that seminiferous tubule. What you're seeing here is just a lifesaver slice out of that seminiferous tubule. So let's look at what the actual sperm cells look like. So sperm cells are basically a nucleus with a motor and a propeller attached to it, wearing a cap, okay? So the only design for sperm that is important is that it swims and it fertilizes an egg. I'm bringing nothing else to the table. I'm bringing a nucleus with my genetic material, the end. So when it comes to their shape, they're really specifically designed for the swimming and the fertilizing, and that's it. At the top, you have the acrosome, okay? So you've got that structure right there. The acrosome helps to kind of burrow the sperm through the mucus of the vaginal canal and the uterus and the fallopian tube to get to the egg. The thing is, it's finite. Imagine a pencil eraser and going, eventually the eraser would basically rub off and you wouldn't have anything left. Well, the acrosome is kind of the same way. It works for a certain amount of time, but eventually it runs out. And that sperm cell, once it runs out, if it's not next to the egg, just kind of goes funk, and it's done. Then the one behind it goes, thanks, and it keeps going. The thing is, that acrosome is designed as kind of an enzymatic way of burrowing its way to try and get to the egg. And yes, there are a lot of sacrificial lambs to get to that egg. The thing behind it is the nucleus. This is what is carrying the genetic material from dad. Remember, half from dad, half from mom. This is dad's half. The mitochondria in this mid piece are basically the motor. They're the ones providing the energy so that the tail can, okay, and it can swim. Other than that, dad isn't really giving much, okay? And that's going to become important if we talk about oogenesis. One of the things that's kind of cool is when you're doing spermatogenesis, you end up with 4 viable sperm. With oogenesis, you only end up with 1. And the primary reason is because when sperm comes along, it's coming with a nucleus and that's it. All of the other things, mitochondria, endoplasmic reticulum, Golgi apparatus, lysosomes, peroxisomes, anything like that has to come from mom's egg. So that has to be relatively large and make up for the fact that dad is coming with a nucleus and nothing else. Okay, so this is basically another viewpoint of what we were just talking about. So membranous urethra, there we go. Here is the testy, right? Here is my epididymis with the head, the body, the tail, and then coming off of that tail is the ductus deferens. You will notice that the ductus deferens comes up and behind the bladder. You can see it here where they cut the bladder out of the way. As this ductus deferens gets to where it's going to actually enter the urethra, it expands out. See how it's a little thicker? That is called the ampulla of the ductus deferens. It's where it expands out slightly. Now, that gland that I showed you in the previous picture, the seminal vesicle and the ampulla of the ductus deferens merge to make the ejaculatory duct. Okay, very, very small, not a real long tube. It's just where they merge together. This is the urethra. Okay, here's the prostate. Literally, you've got two ejaculatory ducts, one on each side, that empty into the prostatic urethra. The prostate is kind of like an apple with a straw through it. The urethra goes directly through the middle of this prostate gland. So the prostate also makes product that it includes with the ejaculate. So you're getting fluid from your seminal vesicle, you're getting fluid from the prostate. Now remember that little bobal urethral gland? That's these guys right here. And that small, teeny tiny piece of that urethra where those are is going to be the membranous urethra, okay? Now, the longest part of the male urethra is the spongy urethra here, okay? Now, remember what I said in the previous picture. This is where it's going to fill up with blood to become erect so that it can fertilize an egg, or it can transfer the sperm to fertilize an egg. So this lighter pink on the outside, this is the corpora cavernosa, spongy tissue. Dead center in the middle and going around my glans penis is going to be the corpus spongiosum, okay? So you basically have three pieces of erectile tissue, okay? And they all fill up to fill the penis, which is this right here, okay? Now, the glans penis is the end, we know that. You've got the external urethral orifice, which is the exit for both urine and for semen. If we come over here to where we have more than just our ductus deferens, you will notice that we've got the scrotum, we've got the dartros muscle, and the cremaster muscle. These are the muscles that will pull the testes up toward the body when they are too cold and let them loose away from the body when it is too warm. Okay, like I said, sperm formation is temperature sensitive, so you do have to make sure that they stay at the right temperature, at homeostatic temperature. This whole structure here, okay, is called the spermatic cord. It is a combination of the ductus deferens, the testicular artery in red, the testicular veins in blue, the testicular nerve in yellow. You've got the fascia, the connective tissue, and like I said, the cremaster muscle, as well as internal fascia. See how there's kind of white out here and that kind of whitish blue in here? So you've got the external fascia and you've got the internal fascia, the internal and external spermatic fascia. This whole thing, okay, this whole spermatic cord can also be called the inguinal canal. If you are a developing fetus and you have the genetics to become a little boy, this is actually the tube, that canal, that the testes take to go from being inside your pelvic cavity down into the scrotum, okay? So that it's in the right place. All right. So, there is nothing new in this. It's the same. It's just a different viewpoint where I don't have all of this business around. But the parts are exactly the same here, okay? You've got the prostate, you've got the prostatic urethra, you've got the seminal vesicle, you've got the ejaculatory duct, the ampulla of the ductus deferens, the urinary bladder, the membranous urethra, the bobal urethral gland, the spongy urethra. Oh, well, You've got the bulb of the penis and the crus of the penis. These are attachment points so that when you have an erection, it'll actually be erect. Still have the corpora cavernosa and the spongy urethra, and the corpus spongiosum. And of course, the end is the glans penis and the external urethral opening, the exit. Now, if you take the penis and cut it like a lifesaver, up here, okay, not at the end, but up here, you would see that here in the corpora cavernosa, remember I said we have three kind of places where blood goes. You have this on both sides. Oops, here on both sides. And then in the middle, you have that spongy urethra, okay, with the corpus spongiosum. On the dorsal side of the penis, if the penis is erect, on the dorsal side, the back side, is where you have the veins, the arteries, and the nerves that are actually going to help to fill this spongy tissue with fluid so that it can become erect. You've got the dorsal vein of the penis, you've got the dorsal arteries of the penis, and you have the dorsal nerve. Out here, more superficially, you've got the superficial dorsal vein, the deep fascia of the penis, the superficial fascia, and of course the skin of the penis itself, okay? So, female reproductive system. Again, mid-sagittally cut, it looks like this. So, remember I said nothing on top of the urinary bladder, right? Well, here's the female's urinary bladder. There's her urethra. This is the uterus. It literally sits right on top of the bladder. If you've ever wondered why women who are pregnant have to pee all the time, it's because they've got a baby sitting on top of the bladder going anytime they move, okay? The uterus is where the baby develops. You've got the uterine tube, also known as the fallopian tube, also known as the oviduct. 3 different names, the same exact thing. But the uterine tube is what brings the egg from the ovary down into the uterus, okay? And that's the ovary right there. All right, you know what? I'm gonna do the female as its own lecture.